Most women, we have a whole separate program on how to transition from pelvic pain or not feeling anything at all from intercourse or vaginal penetration to sensation and pleasure. And it's a process that you have to be very careful with because many times for women, their first experience of penetration was it was going to a gynecologist sometimes, very cold, very uncomfortable, very nervous, or sadly, about, at least in the United States, somewhere between 1 in 5 to 1 in 3 women have been sexually molested when they were younger, and they just never talk about it. So that's their first experience. And that leaves a lot of landmines in the woman as far as her ability to feel pleasure, as far as her trauma. I mean, for instance, Tim Ferriss, I'm really, really proud that he, as a person, would do this. But I don't know if you heard recently, he explained why he kind of dropped off the face of the earth for almost 2 years. Basically, he, I don't know what country it was in, but I believe he was doing ayahuasca or some type of agent that caused altered states, and was with a group. And while he was doing that, he remembered some memories that caused him to just totally freak out and have panic attacks. And fortunately, I'm not sure where he was, who he was with, but they had a very good trainer and guide. And long story short, what he finally came out with was he had been severely sexually abused when he was just between 2 and 4, if I remember right. And his babysitter had a young boy that was an early teenager that sexually abused him. And the babysitter didn't even know. She was taking her son over to watch Tim. And he had completely repressed those memories and had no total unawareness of it until that came up. And when that hit him, it hit him like a freight train. And he had to spend, as I understand, a couple years, that maybe, I'm not sure what the exact time length was, just to figure out how to deal with stuff again. And he realized that had caused a repeating pattern in his relationships.
This almost opens up another I guess, dialogue into the epigenetics of trauma, because I mean, it's not my speciality, but it does make a lot of sense to me. I mean, I can look at my grandmother as an example. My late grandmother, she was very much in the peak of the war, and they had to run away from the Germans invading their village in Italy. And the trauma and the experiences that they had to encounter during that period of time, and then getting onto a ship thinking that they were going to go to the States. So technically I should have been American, but I'm not. But landed up switching halfway through and landing up in South Africa. And, all the sort of the narrative that goes with that and how they digested that trauma was literally exactly the same way, just blocking it away. There was nothing that was actually there to sort of tease that out and help them process that and understand that. And if I just look at sort of this concept of guilt has been passed through my family, and I can see the whole root. If I look at the family tree, I know exactly where that root is sort of, I guess, being bestowed on me. And so part of my karma in this lifetime is really having to go back and look at this historical trauma and try and digest that and unpack that to almost create the separation of, this is not my stuff, and I can sort of re-narrate my story. But how many times does this happen that, as you're rightfully saying, there is mass loads of sexual trauma that has been happening throughout history, and then this sort of gets fed into our narrative, and it's not our narrative, as an example. It doesn't even need to actually have happened to us, but yet there is still some kind of component impacting our sexuality.
Oh, yes. And it's for men, I don't know the percentage of men that have encountered sexual abuse, but for women, there are good odds that if you're in a relationship, your partner has endured that and may or may not even be aware of it. And that is impacting their sexual response. What we've found with women and different, there are a lot of Indian practices, and there's some Taoist practices that are wonderful for that, where basically the woman is with a partner that she's comfortable being intimate with and totally trust actually. And the partner does a vaginal massage that's very slow. And sometimes you can have 10 or 12 sessions needed. And it goes from just basically touching the different areas in the entrance and halfway through, and then the deep areas of the vaginal canal on the anterior fornix on the top and the posterior fornix and the cervix, and just saying, how does that feel? And sometimes combining that with holding your hand on the belly and gently rubbing and assuring her it's okay. So her goal there is to simply feel the sensation of what this feels like with no expectation for anything other than just feeling it. And usually, not every time, but usually after several sessions, the woman starts to notice that that can feel pleasurable. But again, if there's any pressure, any expectation, do you feel it yet? Do you feel it yet? How's it? It should be something just like you're giving them a back rub, but you are going through this process, this ritual of massage solely for giving her the opportunity to feel that sensation and think, well, what is that? How does she react to that? And sometimes what you have to be very careful about is sometimes it can trigger a really traumatic response.
100%. 100%. I think the body is a minefield holding on to all of these memories for us, and it just takes one little trigger to actually spur that on. And one of the things that I often play with in my head is, and rightfully so, when you were saying about going to a gynecologist, or a young woman going to a gynecologist for the first time, having sex for the first time is fundamentally a trauma, unless you have been really guided very gently into that process. But even the narrative around breaking one's virginity, there's so much violence that's attached to that, just the narrative in itself. I can only imagine the anxiety that sort of instills in a woman going through a process like that. I understand the anxiety of the man being the penetrator in that, and not wanting to hurt and not wanting to inflict pain, but almost thinking, actually, there is going to be pain, so I have to deal with that in some way, shape, or form. And most men during that young age aren't even equipped to actually deal with the emotionality around, now my partner's in pain and I'm technically inflicted something that is quite, traumatizing to her body, or at least to a sacred space. How do I hold that? How do I contain that? How do I speak through that process?
Well, there's good news and bad news for that based on my experiences. The bad news is most teenage guys, and I can honestly say from my own experience, even though I studied Taoist techniques, they don't realize that they're just happy to be there and nervous about what they're doing. And this system has worked well enough to keep us around on the planet, so it does work from a reproductive standpoint. But Barry Komisarek had some very interesting observations with women. He and Beverly Whipple at Rutgers, they did functional MRI studies of women with vaginal penetration and different types of orgasm. And some very interesting things they found. Beverly first came to him, at least as I understand. Beverly was actually an IASHS grad prior to getting her doctorate at Rutgers. And she was focusing, she was a gynecological nurse for paralyzed women. And she was telling Barry that several women that she cared for said that they could experience vaginal orgasm. And even though they had absolutely no sensation from their ribs down. And so what they did was, I think there were 6, I don't recall, women that volunteered to have their partner come in and stimulate them with a non-metal or non-ferrous metal device. I'm not sure what they used, but to stimulate them to what they described as orgasm while they were inside a functional MRI. So they had them, they were in this big tube where their head was. And what they showed was, with the vaginal stimulation, basically you had a branch of the vagus nerve light up, and then part of the let me make sure, and then part of the brainstem lit up. And that, it's kind of hard with functional MRI when you're looking at orgasm, but basically normally, and this is one thing a lot of people don't realize, we've got two hemispheres of our brain, and pretty much everything except our vaginal area, and for women, I say our, I suppose prostate for men, it's coming to the left or the right side. So when you see clitoral stimulation for women, it's lighting up in one area. And there's a slightly different area for vaginal stimulation. But when it was done just vaginally, he found that it did light up with the vagus nerve. It went through the brain stem and it went up to the brain. And what that meant was, normally we associate everything's coming through our spine, but the vagus nerve, which has two branches that go out throughout our body, separate from the spine, that was sending that data. And it appears that's a very primitive, the original system that early creatures used for reproduction. But there's several really, really interesting points to that, that I wanted to mention as far as pain and trauma with intercourse. They also found that women's pain threshold increased profoundly when they had vaginal stimulation. And if they had vaginal or just orgasm, clitoral orgasm, but if they had vaginal, I forget the percentages, but tremendous increase in pain threshold. And that would make sense if you're going through a process of giving childbirth to be able to reduce the pain. But they would have their hand in freezing cold water and see how long they could stand that before and after having an orgasm, and it would be tremendously longer. So the reason I'm mentioning that, getting back to guys, the bad news is a lot of guys are oblivious to this, and I get it. We're young, and the good news is if you go through a cycle of stimulating the vagus nerve, a lot of the so-called erogenous zones in the ear, the neck, usually things that make women or guys kind of go like that, in a good way, produce goosebumps. If you stroke those areas and kiss them here on the breast, and you rub the belly, you can actually pre-stimulate, at least based on our observation, pre-stimulate the vagal response, which helps the woman get much more relaxed, be more accepting, and in the mindset that's needed to experience orgasm. So then when you do have penetration, and ideally have a clitoral orgasm first, and then finger penetration if it's first time, and if you can induce orgasm, and at that point her pain threshold is significantly higher. So if there is discomfort from actual intercourse, she's better equipped to deal with it. Now, she might have sensitivity later, but that is an approach that is what we found to be the least traumatic approach, because we've interacted with people that have gone through terrible trauma and it never had any sexual activity. And in my core research was on anorgasmia, and that's the recommended path, where they do what I ended up calling intimacy massage, because I took Masters and Johnson's sensate focus technique and I mapped it to where the vagus nerve was. And if the partner is willing to go through that cycle and then go through a external orgasm process first, it can oftentimes help the woman deal with whatever horrible situation sooner or later, either consciously or from a blood flow standpoint in the brain, the unconscious part, she's going to have to at least accept that it happened. Not that it's okay, but and move on if she's able to get past it. That's just such a hard thing for so many women to deal with, and nobody talks about it.
Steve, the interesting thing for me is that, that explanation that you gave there would be the perfect explanation that should be given to young guys and girls, for that matter, so that they know what they're receiving or what they should be expecting fundamentally. But under the bracket of, this is what foreplay is about. This is fundamentally what it is. It's not just the sake of just doing 1-2 techniques, but it's really about helping your partner receive you in the best way possible, so it diminishes any of that pain response.
Exactly. I mean, the Taoist method goes through an extensive process of which would be considered foreplay. A lot of tantric, I'm not as well versed in the tantric areas, but they appear to do that as well. The Taoist methods I learned do.
There's some really, really good Taoist methods as well in terms of anxiety reduction as well, and around the navel and putting 3 fingers in, sort of putting pressure under the navel, above the navel, side and side. when someone experiences a lot of anxiety to sort of almost release that tension. And it's really something I think everybody should really explore, I think.
I totally agree. I mean, just a simple belly rub. I mean, what we strongly advise to students is that they first learn that intimacy massage technique, which takes a little more time, but it can literally double or triple or sometimes quadruple the woman and the man's sensitivity to touch. It's pretty amazing how it can help. But then, if possible, each night for the couple, as they go through a little ritual for winding down, when they get in bed, ideally be in bed half an hour early, and usually it's the male doing this, and I'm talking about, heterosexual relationships. It really doesn't matter for whatever the gender is or that, but basically the one partner rubs the woman's ears in a simple way. And then we've added certain things where you rub the head, which actually stimulates the cranial nerves. It feels really good. Then they press here down, and then they rub the belly. And if you're doing the official Taoist way, it's 108 times. I don't truly know if it matters. Just in a slow clockwise motion. If you want to have a sexual interaction, if the man strongly sucks the woman's nipples with a large vacuum while he's touching and rubbing her kneecaps and her thighs, no sexual contact there for vaginal contact, just vulva. Just doing that and then finishing with the woman facing him and running his hand up the back of her, on her back, on each side of the spine, running that up, helping her relax. That can do wonders for helping the woman sleep deeper, and the man actually, and then if possible at the end, synchronizing your breathing, where one person follows the other person's breathing. That can be a game changer for trauma in relationships, for stress, for sleeping together. It's actually part of a weight loss program we have, because you've got to get your cortisol down before you go to bed. But the trick, I got a lot of guys think, well, why would I want to do this? Well, you can take turns with that. But another thing that can be done with the guy is, because the guy benefits when the woman relaxes. We are very social creatures, far more than we realize. And when we are engaging with a partner and we're seeing them being helped, that act of caring does impact you. But the woman can also gently stroke the guy's penis. And with the point, now some guys aren't going to like this because they'd feel sexually frustrated at the end. Since I'm older and have practiced a lot of things like that for decades, and some guys may want to orgasm at the end, but if the woman simply gently strokes the guy's penis, and there are a few different techniques she can use, all she's doing is she is focusing on breathing, on relaxing, on feeling the sensations her partner is giving her, being honest if she wants him to do something different or stop or do it more. And then she's just moving her hand very gently. She's not really focusing a lot of her attention on his penis, just enough. What that does for the guy. Now, when we're young, we're like, why the heck would we need this? But with the crap we eat in our diets and all the stuff going on and whatever, all these other things, in the United States, ED starts hitting men in their 40s. And one great workout you can do to keep your penis in shape is have your woman keep it nice and hard for 10 minutes each night.
There is fundamentally a function to our erection, not just for the sake of penetration, correct?
Well, that's an interesting question. I wish we had the actual owner's manual. I mean, a lot of mammals have a bacula, which is a penis bone. Yep. And we're one of the, even a lot of monkeys, some of our closest apparent relatives. So that's a whole nother topic, but for erectile dysfunction, it has a tremendous benefit health-wise and psychologically for the guy.